Layla Croft was 30 seconds away from watching another woman drive off in a brand new Porsche 911 Turbo S. The white one, the $230,000 one, the one Katie Devane had been posting about all week with hashtags like Blessed Life and Upgrade Complete. Katie's manicured hand was already reaching for the door handle. The salesman in his perfectly pressed suit was smiling that commissioned smile. And Terry Holloway, Layla's ex-husband of exactly 6 hours, stood there with his chest puffed out and his chin lifted like a man who'd conquered the world. That satisfied look on his face, Layla knew it well. She'd seen it at dinner parties when he closed deals. She'd seen it in boardrooms when competitors folded. She'd seen it that morning at the courthouse when she signed the divorce papers with a cheap blue pen while he checked his watch. The look that said he'd won everything. The look that said she'd lost it all. It lasted exactly 47 seconds, the time between the first card swipe and the third decline. 47 seconds of watching a man who thought he owned the world realize he couldn't even buy a car. But that's getting ahead of things. None of them knew what was coming. Not the FBI investigation that would tear through Terry's company like a hurricane. Not the viral video that would be seen by 14 million people. Not the 14 years in federal prison that would erase everything he'd built. To understand how they got here, to this glass showroom in Oak Brook, where Terry Holloway's empire began to crumble, the story needs to go back. Back to that morning. Back to 7 years of marriage. Back to the moment Layla stopped hoping and started watching. Her name was Layla Croft, 38 years old, and until 6 hours ago, she'd been Mrs. Terry Holloway. That satisfied look would return, 18 months later, in a place none of them expected, and that time, the fall would be so much harder. The Cook County Courthouse smelled like floor wax and desperation. Layla sat in a gray plastic chair with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. Across the table, Terry was checking his Rolex. His lawyer was scrolling through emails. Everyone was ready to move on. 7 years, that's how long she'd been his wife. 7 years of dinner parties and business trips and smiling for photographs.
7 years of building something she thought was theirs. 7 years of being wrong. The mediator slid the final document across the table. She picked up the pen, blue ink, cheap ballpoint, the kind of pen you use to sign away a life. Terry leaned back in his chair. That look was already spreading across his face. He told her this was the best thing for both of them. He said she wasn't equipped for the life he was building, that she never had been. Layla didn't respond. She just signed her name. Clean, clear, not a single stroke out of place. Terry stood up, buttoning his jacket, the navy suit, the one she'd picked out for him 2 years ago, the one that made him look like a senator. She used to love that suit. She used to love a lot of things about him. He said he hoped there were no hard feelings. His voice was almost gentle, almost convincing. He told her she'd land on her feet, that women like her always did. Women like her. She wondered what that meant. Women who cooked his meals and ironed his shirts and looked the other way when he came home smelling like someone else's perfume. Women who pretended not to notice the charges for hotels they never visited together. He walked toward the door where Katie was waiting, sunglasses indoors, like a celebrity hiding from paparazzi. When she saw Layla looking, she smiled, thin, victorious. Katie told him to come on, called him baby, said they should go get a car, loud enough for Layla to hear every word. They left. The door swung shut, and for a long moment, Layla just sat there in the silence. Her lawyer, Patricia Okonkwo, touched her arm and asked if she was all right. Layla said she was fine, and she meant it. Because here's what Terry didn't know. Here's what none of them knew. For the past 11 years, long before she ever met Terry Holloway, Layla had been working as a financial analyst. Not just any analyst. She was the CFO of a logistics startup called Rapid Route. They weren't famous. They weren't flashy. They were just very, very good at what they did. 3 years ago, Amazon acquired them for $47 million. Her share in stock options and retention bonuses came to $3.2 million. After taxes, she had $2.1 million sitting in an account in Delaware, an account Terry didn't know existed, an account she'd kept separate because something in her gut told her she might need it someday.
That something turned out to be right. But the money wasn't even the best part. The best part was the house in Naperville.
4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a garden she'd planted herself with roses and hydrangeas and a Japanese maple that turned crimson every fall. Terry loved that house. He loved telling people about that house. He loved pretending he'd bought it. But the house wasn't his. It never had been. Her grandmother left it to her 2 years before she even met Terry. It was in her name, and only her name, protected by a trust that her grandmother's lawyer had insisted on. Back then, Layla thought it was unnecessary, paranoid even. Now she understood it was the greatest gift she'd ever received. Terry thought she was leaving this marriage with nothing. He thought she'd be crawling back to her mother's house in Indiana, broke and broken. He was so wrong. The Porsche dealership in Oak Brook sat like a glass temple on the edge of Chicago's wealthiest suburbs. That Tuesday afternoon, Layla stood near a silver Cayenne, pretending to read a brochure about horsepower and torque. She'd been there for 20 minutes before they arrived. She knew they'd come. Katie had been posting about her surprise all week. Terry walked in like he owned the place. He always walked like that. Into restaurants, into boardrooms, into their marriage. Katie was draped on his arm, wearing a white dress so tight it looked painted on. Her heels clicked against the polished concrete like a metronome counting down to disaster. The salesman's name tag said Bradley. His smile said 6% commission on a $230,000 sale. Terry pulled out his wallet, black leather, Gucci. Layla had bought him 3 Christmases ago. He tossed a credit card onto the counter and said to run it. They were paying in full. $230,000, just like that.
Katie was already taking selfies, angling her phone to catch the Porsche logo, then her face, then her cleavage, content for Instagram, evidence of her new life, proof that she'd won the prize. Bradley swiped the card. The machine beeped. He frowned, typed something, swiped again. He apologized, voice dropping to a whisper. The card had been declined. Terry laughed, said it was impossible, told him to try again. Bradley tried again, same result. Terry's smile flickered, just for a second. He pulled out another card, platinum, told Bradley to use this one, declined. The showroom had gone quiet. Other customers were starting to look. A woman in pearls whispered to her husband. A young man in a Tesla jacket smirked. Terry's face was turning red. He reached into his wallet one more time and pulled out the black American Express, the invitation-only card, the one with no preset spending limit, the one that was supposed to be impossible to decline. He swiped it himself this time. His hand was shaking, just slightly, just enough for Layla to notice from across the room. The machine beeped. Bradley's voice had changed now, less eager, more cautious. He said this card was also showing as declined, suggested there might be some mistake with the bank. Katie had stopped taking selfies. She was staring at Terry with wide eyes, asking what was going on, calling him Richie. She called him Richie. In 7 years of marriage, Layla had never once called him that. Maybe that was part of the problem. Maybe she'd never learned to make him feel like the center of the universe, or maybe she just wasn't willing to pretend. Layla slipped her phone out of her purse and typed a quick message, Phase 1 complete. The response came instantly. Received. Proceed to Phase 2. She tucked her phone away and walked toward the exit. She didn't look at Terry. She didn't need to. She could feel his eyes on her back as she pushed through the glass doors into the afternoon sun. The credit card cancellations weren't personal. They were legal.
During the marriage, Terry had opened those cards using funds from their joint accounts that Layla had every right to freeze once she discovered clear evidence of asset dissipation, the legal term for spending marital money on your mistress. She'd spent 11 months documenting everything, every transfer, every suspicious expense, every lie. She had spreadsheets, she had screenshots, she had receipts. The frozen accounts were just the beginning, a warning shot across the bow, a way of letting Terry know that the woman he'd underestimated for 7 years was finally awake. But what he didn't know yet was that this was only the first act. The real show was still 18 months away. The discovery of Katie wasn't dramatic. There was no lipstick on a collar, no perfume on a shirt. It was a credit card statement.
$12,400 at a jeweler in downtown Chicago, dated 2 weeks before Layla's birthday. She remembered staring at that line item for a long time, trying to convince herself there was an explanation. Maybe it was a gift for his mother. Maybe it was an investment piece he was planning to surprise her with later. But the thing about lies is that they have a texture. Once you learn to feel it, you can't unfeel it. She didn't receive any jewelry that birthday. She received a card, generic and unsigned until the morning of, and a dinner reservation at a restaurant Terry picked because he liked the wine list. He spent most of the evening on his phone, texting someone who made him smile in a way Layla hadn't seen in years. That night, lying next to him in the dark, she made a decision. She wasn't going to confront him. She wasn't going to cry or scream or beg for explanations. She was going to find out the truth, and then she was going to decide what to do with it. She started paying attention after that, not confronting, not accusing, just watching, documenting, building a file. It's amazing what you can learn when you stop hoping and start looking. The hotel receipts were easy to find. He used the same card for everything: the Peninsula, the Langham, the Four Seasons, always midweek, always when he said he was working late.
The text messages took longer. What she did to get them wasn't something she was proud of, but when you suspect your husband of infidelity, you do things you never thought you were capable of. Katie wasn't the first, she was the fourth. Over 7 years, there had been 3 others: a paralegal at his law firm, a marketing consultant he met at a conference, the daughter of one of his subcontractors. Each affair followed the same pattern: expensive gifts, secret trips, promises of a future that never materialized, and then, eventually, a payoff: hush money disguised as a consulting fee or a severance package. But Katie was different. Katie was permanent. Katie was the one he'd chosen to replace her with. The night Layla found the photos from Turks and Caicos, the ones taken during Terry's supposed conference in Dallas, she didn't cry. She didn't throw things. She just sat at her computer in the dark, looking at pictures of her husband with another woman, and made a decision. She opened a new folder, named it Evidence, and started saving everything. What she found over the next 11 months would turn her stomach. Her name was Deborah Nance, gray hair, reading glasses, and the personality of a very patient bloodhound. Patricia had recommended her with a warning. She was expensive, but she found everything. Everything turned out to be an understatement. Deborah spent 6 weeks going through the financial records of Holloway Development Group, Terry's company, the company he'd built with Layla's support, her encouragement, her blind faith, the company that was supposed to be their legacy. The Shell Corporation came first, Devane Consulting LLC, registered in Nevada under the name of Katie's mother. On paper, it was a consulting firm providing strategic services to Holloway Development. In reality, it was a funnel. Money went in from legitimate projects. Money came out to pay for Katie's apartment in Miami, Katie's jewelry, Katie's trips to Turks and Caicos while Terry was supposedly at conferences in Dallas. Total diverted, $1.4 million over 3 years. But that wasn't even the worst part. Terry was also inflating project costs, padding invoices, skimming from the top. Every time Holloway Development built a new condo complex or renovated a commercial property, Terry was adding phantom expenses and pocketing the difference. A few thousand here, 10,000 there, it added up. Total fraud, approximately $4.7 million. When Deborah showed Layla the final report, all 347 pages of it, Layla didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat in that office and stared at the numbers until they stopped looking like betrayal and started looking like ammunition. The man she'd married wasn't just a cheater, he was a thief. 3 weeks later, she went to the charity gala. The Drake Hotel, annual fundraiser for the Holloway Development Foundation, Terry's pet project, a way of laundering his reputation while his accountants laundered his money. Every year, Chicago's elite gathered in that ballroom to write checks and pat each other on the back. Layla wasn't supposed to be there. The divorce was being finalized. Katie was his official date now. But her name was still on the original invitation list, and no one had thought to remove it. She wore a black dress, simple, elegant, the kind that doesn't demand attention but commands it anyway. She walked into that ballroom alone, and for a moment, the entire room went quiet. Terry saw her first. He was standing near the bar with Katie on his arm. When their eyes met, his face went through a rapid sequence: surprise, anger, fear, then finally contempt.
He walked over, leaving Katie behind, asked what she was doing there. Layla told him she was supporting a good cause, children with cancer. Wasn't that what this was about? His jaw tightened. He told her she wasn't welcome, that this was his event. She looked around at the glittering crowd. Actually, she said, the foundation was a registered nonprofit, which made it everyone's event. Before he could respond, a man appeared at his elbow. Glenn Harrington, old money, one of Terry's biggest investors. He had the kind of face that looked permanently disappointed. Glenn said he needed a word with Terry, in private. His voice was pleasant, but his eyes were cold.
Terry glanced at Layla, then at Glenn. He asked if it could wait. Glenn said it couldn't. His wife had an interesting lunch last week with Mrs. Croft. She showed him some documents he'd very much like to discuss. Layla watched the color drain from Terry's face. It was beautiful. Glenn took Terry by the arm and steered him toward a private room. The door closed behind them. Through the frosted glass, shapes moved, hands gestured. Whatever Glenn was saying, Terry didn't like it. Whatever Glenn told him in that room, it shook him badly. Good. Katie came back 20 minutes later, vibrating with barely contained rage. She told Layla she didn't know what she thought she was doing, but Terry was going to destroy her. He had lawyers, he had connections. Layla was nothing, a nobody who got lucky enough to marry up, and now she was bitter because he found someone better. Layla looked at her, really looked at her. 27, maybe 28. Beautiful in the way that required constant maintenance, Botox and fillers and weekly salon appointments, and absolutely convinced that she'd won. Layla told her she should ask Terry about Devane Consulting. Katie's face flickered. She asked what that meant. Layla told her to ask him where the money came from, ask him whose name was on the paperwork, ask him what happens when the IRS starts asking questions, ask him why her mother's name was on corporate documents she'd never seen. Layla's eyes went wide. She asked how Layla knew about her mother. Layla said she knew everything. She'd known for months. The question Katie should be asking herself was why Terry didn't tell her that Layla knew. She walked away, leaving Katie standing there with her champagne glass and her confusion. Behind her, the party continued, music and laughter and the clink of crystal. But underneath it all, something had shifted. Cracks were forming in the foundation of Terry's perfect life. She found out later what Glenn had told him in that private room. The investors were conducting an independent audit. The irregularities that Deborah Nance had found, the same irregularities Layla had shared with Margaret Harrington over lunch, were about to become official findings.
Glenn gave him 2 weeks to come up with an explanation. Terry didn't have one. He never would. He had no idea the noose was already tightening. Leonard Whitmore's office sat on the 50th floor of a building that looked like it was made entirely of glass and ambition. The view from his window showed all of Chicago, spread out like a game board waiting to be played. He was 70, maybe older, white hair, wire-rimmed glasses, a suit that cost more than most people's cars. The kind of man who'd seen everything and was surprised by nothing. He specialized in corporate fraud. His reputation was legendary. His fees were astronomical. When Layla first called his office, her secretary told her he wasn't taking new clients. His calendar was booked for the next 18 months. When she mentioned the name Holloway Development Group, there was a long pause, and then the secretary asked if she could come in the following morning. After reviewing her file for 2 hours, he took off his glasses and looked at her. He asked if she understood what she had here. She said she thought so. He shook his head slowly. He told her he didn't think she did. This wasn't a divorce case anymore. This was criminal fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering. Her ex-husband hadn't just cheated on her. He'd cheated the federal government. He'd cheated his investors, his partners, and probably a dozen other people they hadn't even identified yet. Layla sat very still. She asked what that meant. He told her they had options. They could pursue this civilly, sue for recovery of marital assets, fraudulent conveyance, the whole standard playbook. She'd probably win, but it would take years, cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees, and Terry would find ways to hide what was left before the judgment was even issued. Men like him were good at making money disappear. She asked what the alternative was. He said they could bring in the authorities, let the FBI handle it. She could cooperate as a witness, provide the evidence, and let the justice system do its job. They had resources he didn't have, subpoena power.
the ability to freeze assets before they could be moved, the threat of criminal prosecution, which tended to make people very cooperative, very quickly.
She asked what would happen to Terry. Whitmore told her that if even half of what was in that file was provable, and based on what he was seeing, he suspected it was all provable, Terry was looking at federal prison. 10 years minimum, probably more. Wire fraud alone carried up to 20 years per count, and from what she'd shown him, there were multiple counts. Layla thought about that. 10 years, a decade of Terry's life gone. The company he'd built, destroyed. The reputation he'd cultivated, ruined. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd stolen, everything he lied about, all of it collapsing around him. Part of her wanted to feel satisfied, vindicated. Instead, she just felt tired. She told him she needed to think about it. He said of course, but warned her not to think too long. Evidence had a way of disappearing when people got desperate, and her husband struck him as the type who would get very desperate very quickly once he realized what was happening. 2 days later, she got a call from someone unexpected. Her name was Patty Wellman. She'd been Terry's executive assistant for 12 years. Reliable, discreet, the kind of employee who sees everything and says nothing. Until she was fired. She told Layla she'd seen the news about the divorce. She wanted to reach out. She thought she might have some information Layla would want to see. They met at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park. Patty was in her 50s, with kind eyes and the slightly haunted look of someone who'd seen too much and stayed too long. She brought a flash drive. She said she'd started noticing things about 3 years ago. Payments that didn't match projects, invoices for services that were never rendered. She asked questions. Terry told her to mind her own business. 6 months later, she was let go. Budget cuts, they said. Layla looked at the flash drive in her hand. She asked what was on it. Patty told her. Emails, contracts, bank transfers, everything she could copy before they walked her out the door. She'd kept it because she didn't know what else to do. And then she saw what was happening with the company, the investors pulling out, the audits. She thought maybe it was time. Layla asked why she was helping. Patty looked at her for a long moment. She said she'd worked for that man for 12 years. She'd covered for him, made excuses for him, cleaned up his messes. And in the end, he threw her away like she was nothing. She paused. She told Layla she seemed like a good person. She didn't think Layla deserved what he'd done to her. Layla took the flash drive and thanked her. Patty nodded. She told Layla to be careful. Terry wasn't as smart as he thought he was, but he was dangerous when he was cornered. Layla would remember those words later. She should have remembered them sooner. With Patty's files added to her own, the case against Terry was overwhelming. Whitmore called it one of the most comprehensive fraud packages he'd ever seen. He told her they were ready. The question was she? She thought about Terry, about the man she'd married and the monster he'd become, about the years she'd wasted and the lies she'd believed, about Katie and the women before her and the women who would probably come after. She told him she was ready. Whitmore picked up the phone and called a number. He spoke for a few minutes, then hung up and looked at her. Agent Marlene Castillo, he said, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. She'd be in touch within the week. Layla asked what happened now. He told her. Now they set the trap, and they wait for her ex-husband to walk right into it. 3 months after the divorce, Terry's lawyer called with a settlement offer. $800,000, paid over 5 years. In exchange, Layla would sign a non-disclosure agreement and agree to never discuss the marriage or its dissolution publicly. It was an insult, a fraction of what she was owed, a bribe to keep her quiet. She accepted, not because she wanted the money, not because she was giving up. She accepted because she needed time.
The FBI investigation was moving forward, but these things take months, sometimes years. She needed Terry to believe he'd won. She needed him to relax. Her lawyer drew up the paperwork. They set the signing date for 90 days out. Plenty of time for Terry to get comfortable. Plenty of time for Layla to finish what she'd started.
Those 90 days were fascinating to watch. Terry went public with Katie. Not just public, aggressively, ostentatiously public. Instagram posts every day, magazine interviews where he talked about finding true love after a difficult marriage, a spread in Chicago Social about the hot developer and his gorgeous girlfriend, photographed in what they called their lakeside estate. Layla's grandmother's house, her garden, the Japanese maple she'd planted the first year of her marriage. They were photographed at restaurants and galas and Cubs games. Terry had never been this visible during their marriage. He'd always been private, protective of his image. Now he was everywhere, as if he was trying to prove something, as if he needed the whole world to see how happy he was. Katie was worse. She posted everything: their breakfasts, their dinners, their vacations, the view from their bedroom window, which was actually the view from Layla's bedroom window. She started a home decor account where she documented her plans to renovate the house, describing it as updating this gorgeous old place we just acquired. Just acquired, as if it was something Terry had bought for her, not something Layla had inherited from a grandmother who died before she ever met him. Katie wanted to tear out the rose garden and put in a pool. She wanted to paint the dining room, the one with the original crown molding, a color she called millennial gray. She wanted to rip out the built-in bookshelves in the study, the ones Layla's grandfather had made by hand, and install a walk-in closet. Layla watched all of it from a distance, through social media and mutual acquaintances. She didn't react, she didn't comment, she just watched and waited. Some nights she'd lie in bed and think about that house, about the memories embedded in its walls, about Christmas mornings and summer afternoons and the sound of her grandmother's voice in the kitchen.
She'd think about Katie ripping it all apart, erasing everything that had made it special, and she'd feel something hot and sharp in her chest. But then she'd remember the plan, the evidence, the trap that was slowly closing around Terry with every passing day. And she'd breathe, and she'd wait. The day before the settlement signing, Agent Castillo called with news that changed everything. She said the grand jury had approved the indictment. They were ready to move. Layla asked when. Castillo said soon, but there was something else she should know. She told Layla they'd been monitoring Terry's communications. He'd hired someone, a fixer, a man named Nolan Birch. They believed he was planning to fabricate evidence against Layla. Layla felt her stomach drop. She asked what kind of evidence. Castillo told her. Financial fraud, money laundering. Terry wanted to make it look like Layla was the one who'd been stealing from the company, like she was the criminal all along. Layla asked if he could do that. Castillo said he could try, but here was the thing. Nolan Birch had been under federal investigation for 18 months. He'd been cooperating with them in exchange for leniency on his own charges. Everything Terry told him, everything he asked him to do, they were recording all of it. Layla closed her eyes. She said it was a trap within a trap. Castillo said exactly. They just needed her to play along a little longer. Could she do that? Layla thought about Terry, about his smug smile and his confident walk, and his absolute certainty that he was smarter than everyone else. She said yes, she could do that. What she didn't know was how far Terry would go. What she didn't know was that the next 3 weeks would be the hardest of her life. What she didn't know was that before this was over, she would become the most hated woman in Chicago, and she would have to watch it happen, and wait, and trust that the truth would eventually come out. It started with a photo.
Not a glamorous photo, not a magazine spread, a mugshot. Layla's face, tired and confused, staring into a camera in what looked like a police station. The photo was real. It had been taken 6 weeks earlier when she'd gone to the FBI field office to provide additional testimony. Standard procedure, they photograph everyone who enters certain areas, security protocol, nothing more. But out of context, stripped of explanation, it looked like something else entirely. It looked like an arrest. Terry posted it on Instagram with a caption that read, "Justice is coming. The truth about my ex-wife is finally being revealed. Stay tuned." The story that accompanied it was elaborate.
According to Terry, Layla was the mastermind behind the financial irregularities at Holloway Development. She'd been skimming money for years. She'd set up the shell companies. She'd forged his signature on documents. She'd framed him to cover her own crimes. The divorce was her attempt to escape before the walls closed in. Every lie he'd told, every dollar he'd stolen, it was actually all her fault. None of it was true. Every single word was a lie. But lies spread faster than truth. That's the nature of the internet. People don't want facts. They want stories. They want villains and heroes and dramatic reversals. And Terry was giving them exactly what they wanted. Within 24 hours, the post had 2 million views. Within 48 hours, it was a national story. Websites picked it up. News channels mentioned it. Social media exploded with opinions from people who'd never met either of them, but were absolutely certain they knew who was lying. The hashtag #JusticeForTerry started trending. Influencers made videos about the case. True crime podcasts discussed the scandal. Anonymous accounts spread screenshots of documents that looked official but were completely fabricated. It was a coordinated campaign, professional and relentless, designed to destroy Layla's reputation before she could destroy Terry's. The comments were brutal. Gold digger, thief, criminal, liar, snake. People she'd never met were calling for her arrest. Strangers were sending her death threats.
Old acquaintances, people who'd smiled at her dinner table and drunk her wine, were unfollowing her, blocking her, erasing her from their lives as if she'd never existed. Katie added her own fuel. She posted tearful videos about how she'd been victimized by Layla's schemes, how she'd trusted Terry only to discover his ex-wife had been stealing from him all along. She called Layla a monster, a predator, a woman who destroyed everyone she touched. She did an interview with a gossip blogger where she cried about the trauma of discovering that the woman who had seemed so nice at the divorce proceedings was actually a criminal mindset. She talked about how scared she was, how she couldn't sleep at night knowing what Layla was capable of. The video got 7 million views. For 3 days, Layla was the most hated woman in Chicago, maybe the most hated woman in America. She couldn't leave her house. Reporters camped outside on the sidewalk, waiting for her to emerge so they could shout questions and shove microphones in her face. Photographers with long lenses tried to catch her through the windows. Her phone rang constantly with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. When she stopped answering, they started leaving voicemails, some threatening, some obscene, some just people calling to tell her she deserved to suffer. Her mother called, crying, asking what was happening. Layla told her it would be okay, told her to stop watching the news, told her she couldn't explain everything right now, but that the truth would come out soon. The grocery store where she'd shopped for years asked her not to come back. Other customers were uncomfortable, they said, creating a scene. She ordered delivery after that, but even the delivery drivers looked at her with suspicion. One of them asked if she was the woman from the internet. She didn't answer. She just took her groceries and closed the door. Old friends stopped calling. Colleagues from her previous job sent carefully worded emails expressing hope that everything would work out, while making it clear they couldn't be publicly associated with her. The one friend who did reach out, a woman named Sandra, who she'd known since college, was told by her husband that it would be better for his career if she kept her distance.
Sandra called to apologize. Layla told her she understood. She did understand. That was the worst part. On the third night, she sat alone in her living room in the dark, the same living room where she'd spent 7 years of her marriage, the same living room where she pretended to be happy while her husband betrayed her in every possible way. The windows were closed, the curtains were drawn. Outside, she could hear the occasional click of a camera or the murmur of reporters talking to each other. Inside, there was only silence and the glow of her phone screen showing notification after notification of people hating her. She thought about giving up, about running, about disappearing and starting over somewhere no one knew her name. She could sell the house, change her identity, move to some small town in another state. She could become someone else, leave Layla Croft behind, and become whoever she wanted to be. But then she remembered what Agent Castillo had told her. Everything he tells Nolan Birch, we're recording. So she waited. She stayed silent. She let the hatred wash over her like a wave, knowing that the tide would eventually turn, knowing that somewhere in a federal office building, people were listening to recordings that would change everything. On the fourth day, it did. The press conference was held at the FBI field office downtown. Agent Castillo stood at a podium flanked by federal prosecutors. Behind her, a screen displayed photographs and documents. She addressed the room. They were there to announce the indictment of Terrence Michael Holloway on charges of wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. The room erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Castillo waited for silence before continuing. Additionally, she said, they had evidence that Mr. Holloway, in an attempt to evade prosecution, had engaged in a deliberate campaign to fabricate evidence against his former wife, Mrs. Layla Croft. This campaign included the creation of false documents, the coordination of a social media disinformation effort, and conspiracy to commit perjury. She pressed a button, and the screen behind her lit up with an audio waveform.
The following recording, she said, was made with the cooperation of federal investigators. Terry's voice filled the room, clear, unmistakable. He said he didn't care if it was true, make it look real. She needs to be destroyed before she destroys me. If we have to create documents, create them. I'll pay whatever it takes. The recording continued. Terry giving instructions to Nolan Birch. Terry discussing how to plant evidence. Terry admitting that he knew Katie could become a liability and suggesting she could be made the mastermind too if necessary. That last part made the reporters gasp. Somewhere, Katie was watching this unfold, realizing that the man she'd trusted had been prepared to sacrifice her too. Castillo turned off the recording. She said Mrs. Croft was not a suspect. She was a cooperating witness whose courage and patience made this investigation possible. The campaign against her was criminal and calculated, and those responsible would be held accountable. Layla wasn't at the press conference. She watched it from her living room, surrounded by the same silence that had felt so oppressive just hours before. But now the silence felt different. It felt like vindication. The internet turned on a dime. The same people who'd been calling for her head 3 days earlier were suddenly apologizing. The same influencers who'd made videos about what a terrible person she was were now making videos about how they'd been manipulated, how they'd fallen for a coordinated disinformation campaign, how they should have waited for all the facts before passing judgment. The hashtag changed. Hashtag Justice for Layla started trending. Within hours, it had more engagement than hashtag Justice for Terry had ever achieved. Compilations appeared everywhere. Screenshots of Terry's confident posts next to his recorded admissions. Side-by-side comparisons of Katie's tearful videos and the federal indictment naming her as an accessory. Timelines showing how the disinformation campaign had been coordinated, with experts analyzing the patterns of fake accounts and bot activity that had amplified the lies.
The same gossip blogger who'd interviewed Katie posted a new video. She called it, "I was wrong, I'm sorry." She cried again, but this time the tears were different. This time she was apologizing to Layla. The video got 15 million views. Terry became a meme, the man who tried to frame his ex-wife, the developer who destroyed himself. There were compilations of his most arrogant Instagram posts set to ironic music. There were dramatic readings of his recorded conversations with Nolan Birch. Someone made a parody account called Terry Holloway's Prison Tips. It had 400,000 followers within a week. Katie deleted all her social media, but not fast enough. Everything had been archived. Every post, every video, every comment she'd made. The internet doesn't let you disappear. The internet remembers everything. Layla got messages too, thousands of them. People apologizing for what they'd said about her. People sharing their own stories of being falsely accused. She didn't respond to most of them. What would she say? She understood the impulse to apologize, but she also knew that most of these people would do the exact same thing the next time a compelling story came along with a villain who was easy to hate. That's just how people are. She didn't hold it against them, but she didn't forgive them either. The arrest happened that same evening. Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse. The irony of the name wasn't lost on anyone. It was a Saturday night and the restaurant was packed with Chicago's elite, the same people who'd attended Terry's charity galas, the same people who'd whispered about Layla at the Porsche dealership, the same people who'd watched her reputation be shredded online. Terry and Katie were at a corner table, celebrating. They didn't know yet. They hadn't seen the press conference. They thought they'd won. Layla was there too, a different table, in the back, alone with a glass of wine, watching. Agent Castillo entered first, 2 other agents behind her. They walked through the restaurant with the calm efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. Terry saw them coming. His face changed. Confusion first, then recognition, then fear.
He tried to run. Where did he think he was going? The agents caught him before he'd taken 3 steps. Diners were standing up, pulling out phones, recording everything. Katie tried to distance herself. She actually pushed her chair back and said loud enough for everyone to hear that she had nothing to do with any of this. One of the agents stopped her, told her she was also wanted for questioning regarding her involvement in Devane Consulting, LLC. Her face went white. Terry saw Layla then, across the restaurant. Through the chaos, his eyes found hers. For a moment, everything else disappeared. Just the 2 of them, the man she'd married and the woman she'd become. He shouted that this was her fault, that she did this to him. Layla didn't respond. She just raised her wine glass, a small toast, a quiet acknowledgement that it was finally over. The agents led him toward the door. He was still shouting, still blaming her, still convinced that none of this was his fault. The restaurant was silent except for the clicking of phone cameras. Every person in that room was recording. Every moment was being captured for posterity. Layla finished her wine, left cash on the table, and walked out into the Chicago night. The air was cold, the stars were hidden by city lights, but for the first time in years, she could breathe. The trial took 14 months. 14 months of testimony and evidence and legal maneuvering. 14 months of watching Terry's empire crumble brick by brick. The verdict came on a Tuesday afternoon. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit perjury. The sentence? 14 years in federal prison. Layla wasn't in the courtroom when it happened. She'd given her testimony months earlier. She'd provided her evidence. She'd done everything the law required of her. When the moment of judgment came, she was at home, in her garden, planting new roses. Whitmore called to tell her. His voice was quiet, satisfied. He said it was done. Terry would be transferred to a federal facility in Minnesota by the end of the month.
She thanked him, hung up, went back to her roses. People expected her to celebrate, to throw a party, give interviews, write a book. They expected her to gloat. She didn't feel like gloating. She felt like planting roses. Holloway Development Group filed for bankruptcy 6 weeks after the verdict. The projects were abandoned, the investors sued, the employees scattered to other firms, other cities, other lives. The house in Naperville, her grandmother's house, was never touched. It had always been hers. It would always be hers. Terry never lived there again after the night of his arrest. Katie's story was shorter. She pleaded guilty to tax fraud related to Devane Consulting, 18 months in a minimum security facility, restitution of $340,000. The apartment in Miami was seized. The jewelry was auctioned. By the time she got out, there would be nothing left of the life she'd tried to steal. Her last Instagram post, before she deleted everything, was a single broken heart emoji. No caption, no hashtags, no comments. Layla thought about Terry sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. She wondered if he understood yet, if he'd had time to reflect on the choices that led him to a cell in Minnesota. Probably not. Men like Terry rarely learn. They spend their lives blaming others, convinced that the world conspired against them, never realizing that they built their own prisons long before the judge handed down the sentence. She sold her stake in Rapid Root the following year, used the money to start a foundation, financial literacy for women leaving difficult marriages, legal resources, career counseling, the kind of support she wished she'd had when she first started suspecting that her husband was not the man she thought he was. She called it the Croft Foundation, not after herself, after her grandmother, the woman who had the foresight to protect what she gave her. Some days she received letters, women who saw her story online, women who recognized pieces of their own lives in hers, women who were still in the middle of their own battles, looking for proof that it was possible to come out the other side. She wrote back when she could, told them what she'd learned. Document everything. Trust your instincts.
Find good lawyers, and never let anyone convince you that you're worth less than you are.
One morning, she woke up early, made coffee, sat on her porch and watched the sun come up over Naperville. The garden was blooming. The Japanese maple was starting to turn. Another fall was coming, another season of change. Her phone buzzed. A notification from Instagram. Someone had tagged her in a post. She opened it, curious. It was a screenshot of an old article. A photo of Terry and Katie at some gala, champagne glasses raised, looking like they owned the world. The caption read, "Throwback to when this guy thought he was untouchable. How's federal prison, Terry?" She smiled, put down her phone, went back to watching the sunrise. Revenge isn't what movies make it seem. It's not triumphant. It's not satisfying in the way stories promise. It's quieter than that, smaller. It's the freedom to drink your coffee in peace, the knowledge that you did everything right, even when everyone else was doing everything wrong. Terry asked her once, at the very beginning, what she was going to do without him, as if she couldn't exist on her own, as if she was nothing without his name, his money, his approval. She never answered. But if she could go back, if she could stand in that courthouse one more time, she knew exactly what she'd say. "I'm going to live, Terry. I'm going to wake up every morning in my grandmother's house, in the life I built for myself, and I'm going to be at peace. I'm going to plant roses and drink coffee and watch the seasons change. I'm going to help other women find the strength I had to find alone. And you're going to spend the next 14 years wondering how you lost everything, how the woman you underestimated turned out to be the one who brought you down. That's what I'm going to do, Terry. That's what I've been doing all along." If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in her place? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories. See you next time.